everybody, welcome to my very first episode of HumpDay Horror. If you've been following me on Instagram or subscribed to me on YouTube for a while, you will know that I am a huge horror movie nerd. It's kind of a problem. And by problem, I mean not at all. I saw my very first horror movie at 6 years old, when I shouldn't have, and I've basically been hooked on horror movies since. I want to put more of my love of the genre out there, so here we are with HumpDay Horror. I want to get more in depth with like unpopular opinions, certain franchises. I want to highlight makeup artists, directors, you know, things like that to really kind of put my random horror knowledge on the internet, regardless of whether people will watch it. My most asked question is,
what's your favorite scary movie?
And if you're anything like me, I never know how to answer that damn question. Well, dudes and babes, today's the day. I figured why not start out this new series with a list of my favorite horror movies so that you guys can kind of get a feel of the horror that I like, that I dislike, the directors that I like, and then you can decide if you want to proceed and watch my series. So without further ado, let's get started. Also, I will tell you right now that there is a spoiler alert ahead. All right, let's go. This light's hot as fuck, so there's that. Coming in at number 12 is Sleepaway Camp, directed by Robert HILTZIK, released in 1983. A family of 3 gets into a boating accident and only one survives. Survivor Angela and cousin Ricky years later are sent off to Camp Arawak, where somebody is picking off the campers one by one. So let me start out by saying that the 1980s are pretty much my favorite era for horror movies because this is when the slasher genre was born. In 1980, 3 years prior to Sleepaway Camp, we had the success of Friday the 13th, which really just catapulted this subgenre into orbit. There have literally been hundreds of copycat movies over the years, which is what Sleepaway Camp can feel like at the beginning. However, this movie stands out to me mainly because it never tries to be more than it is, which is a simple horror movie, but with one of the biggest twists that I've ever seen in my entire life. Spoiler alert. My favorite kill of the movie probably has to be Judy, because, you know, the killer kind of sneaks in there, takes her curling iron and stick it where the sun don't shine, as my Oklahoma family would say. It was a great off-screen kill, and it still sticks to me to this day, which is really hard to do with an off-screen kill. Okay, major spoiler alert ahead, so you've been warned. This movie threw like the biggest twist at me probably since The Sixth Sense, and I know that's a bold statement, but hear me out. So at the beginning of the movie, when Angela and her brother and her dad are all in the boating accident, we are led to believe the entire movie that it is Angela who is the sole survivor, when in reality, Angela died and Peter, the brother, was the actual survivor. But because Ricky's mom, their Aunt Martha, she always wanted a daughter, so she raised Peter to be Angela. Way to let them make their own decisions, Aunt Martha. We don't find this out until the movie's conclusion, whenever 2 camp counselors find a very naked Angela, Peter, standing over a decapitated body and making probably the weirdest fucking noise I've ever heard of in my entire life. Coming in at number 11 is The Mist, directed by Frank Darabont, released in 2007. Based on the 1980 Stephen King novella, David Drayton and son Billy go into town after a natural disaster seems like it has just drenched the town in a strange mist. After one of the town locals runs inside of the grocery store screaming about creatures in the mist and everybody in the store gets locked in there, they soon have to battle the monsters on the outside of the store and the inside. The Mist is definitely a bloody movie, but it doesn't really fit into the slasher genre or like torture porn. It's more like monster horror, which wasn't crazy popular at the times of the early 2000s, but also like totally not looked down upon. I won't go too into depth about The Mist right now because I really want to make my own video about it, but just know that the effects that they did, practical and CGI, I really want to cover in a separate video because it blew my fucking mind. Is this movie scary? Absolutely. To me, this movie scared the shit out of me. Monsters do not usually freak me out, but this movie did such a fantastic job with Stephen King's writing and Darabont's directing for setting the tone of just an existential dread. Like, even me in the audience, I was like, holy fucking shit, there is no way out of this grocery store. Let's talk about Marcia Gay Harden. There are a lot of religious and political symbolism in the movie, but her character is by far my favorite. She starts out the movie with her hair up and a cardigan on, like clutching a Bible in a purse, She's more like wound tight. But as time passes and more people start to die, naturally, us as a human race are going to start looking for answers and a symbol of hope. Mrs. Carmody throughout the entire movie speaks about the end of days and God punishing us for our sins by sending this mist upon the earth. But then she starts to lose her goddamn mind and her hair is down now and her cardigan is like over her shoulders because that means you're crazy for some reason. Then she starts demanding a sacrifice daily so that God will be pleased. So let's relax. My favorite scene is when David and a whole group of people are like, yo, we need to bounce the fuck out of this grocery store. Mrs. Carmody, this bitch, sees them try to escape and tries to stop them. Not only is she trying to stop them, but she's trying to take Billy, David Drayton's son, as the sacrifice for that day. All hell starts to break loose, but then my boy Ollie, who is the grocery store manager, swoops in with his good eagle eye and shoots her once in the stomach with a really cool exploding milk bottle scene and once in the head. And then he just goes,
I killed her.
Thank you, Ollie.
Number 10 is Cabin in the Woods, directed by Joss Whedon and Drew Goddard, released in 2012. A group of 5 friends escape to a family member's cabin in the woods for the weekend. They are soon terrorized by more than meets the eye, and that's all I can say. This movie is a very self-aware horror comedy, kind of meta, if you will. Honestly, this movie is absolutely nothing like what I thought it was going to be, and I really don't want to ruin it for you, so I highly suggest that if you have not seen Cabin in the Woods, you skip this entry so that you can go watch it, and then maybe come back and revisit this video. Okay, we're moving on, you've been warned. I wouldn't necessarily say that Cabin is scary, but there are horror aspects to it. The 5 friends represent horror archetypes: the jock, the whore, the brain, the stoner, and the virgin. If 4 of the friends, with the exception of the final girl, aren't sacrificed by the end of the night, the gods that live under the earth will rise and take over. What's scarier to me is the blatant symbolism. We, as the audience, are the gods living underneath the earth, demanding a sacrifice, aka the killing of the 4 tropes, with the exception of the final girl, in order to be pleased by our regular horror movie formula. When we as the audience get something different, a happy ending, a person dies or survives that we didn't really expect them to or who normally wouldn't, the world ends, aka the movie does bad. The YouTube channel Film Theory does a much better in-depth analysis on this movie's symbolism, so I will link that video down below. I highly suggest you go check it out because holy shit. Number 9 is Misery, directed by comedian Rob Reiner, and it was released in 1990. A famous writer, Paul Sheldon, gets lost in a snowstorm and crashes his car. When he is found by a woman named Annie Wilkes and is nursed back to health, he slowly realizes that she knows more about him than he thought. Misery is terrifyingly realistic, and it's all thanks to the acting by Kathy Bates and James Caan. It's terrifying enough being trapped somewhere due to weather and your legs are broken and the phones don't work and the road's closed, but on top of that you have a crazed fan who will literally do anything to keep you inside of their house. No thanks. Kathy Bates does a great job playing Annie Wilkes, really like teetering on the insane and feel sorry for me, I'm lonely. Honestly, the whole movie is genius. I really can't find a flaw in it. From the slow rise of insanity from Kathy Bates' character to James Caan slowly realizing how truly fucked he is, I really can't find anything wrong with it. Every scene is fantastic, but if I had to pick a favorite, it would have to be the ending scene. At the end of the movie, Paul is wrestling Annie to kill her, and he ends up getting the job done by bashing her over the head with his typewriter and a statue of a pig. The typewriter is symbolic of Annie's love for Paul/Misery, ultimately killing her, and the statue of the pig is a symbol of misery. Annie had a pig throughout the film who she named Misery after Paul Sheldon's character. It is a great sense of justice seeing both of the objects that ultimately made Paul feel trapped and Annie feel free, giving them both liberation from the situation. Number 8 is the Child's Play franchise, directed by Don Mancini and Tom Holland, released in 1988. A struggling Mrs. Barkley manages to get her son, Andy, one of the newest good guy dolls for his birthday, but when people start to die and strange things begin to happen around the doll, Andy soon realizes what type of evil he is dealing with. Okay, well, I know I'm cheating a little bit with this because I'm not talking about one specific movie, I'm talking about an entire franchise. But I genuinely am a huge fan of the Child's Play movies. Yes, even the 2019 reboot. Don Mancini was truly ahead of his time for directing, bringing up taboo topics like a struggling single mother, the foster care system, and even being transgender in Seed of Chucky. His story has held up through a loyal fandom since the 1980s and is continuing to make a difference in the media today. There's talk about the Sci-Fi Network picking up Mancini's Child's Play universe as a TV series, and fans are still crossing their fingers for a sequel to the 2019 movie. But if you want more information / updates on the Child's Play franchise, go follow my boy Chris Parker at 3C Film Reviews. He's super quick with the updates, and he also loves the Child's Play franchise. We call him Chucky Boy, so go give him a follow, please and thank you. As for my favorite scene, I'll be making a whole separate video ranking the Chucky movies from worst to best. Yes, I will be covering Cult and Curse and also the 2019 reboot. But until then, just keep watching this video. Hopefully I haven't lost you yet. Number 7 is The Blair Witch Project, directed by Eduardo Sanchez and Daniel Myrick, released in 1999. A group of film students, Heather, Josh, and Mike, go to the Burkittsville Woods, formerly Blair, Maryland, to shoot a student film documentary about the Blair Witch. The three get lost and run into what they think are kids messing with them. Or is it the Blair Witch herself?
My grandmother used to tell us all, make us go to bed early.
Really?
Say if you stay up after dark or walk around the house too much, a Blair Witch would come and get you.
One of my favorite things about this movie is not only is it one of the very first found footage films, but it is also one of the first films to utilize online marketing. Obviously it's 2020 now and people do this all the time through Instagram and Facebook, but in the late 90s this was almost unheard of and things were like nearly impossible to fact check. The directors knew this, took advantage of it, and released the film as if these students were really missing, which is fucking genius because it worked. People literally thought that this was actual found footage and that these three film students were like dead in the woods somewhere. They did that before social media. Of course this movie scared me. This is one of the first R-rated movies I ever saw when I was 13 years old.
And I'm 99% sure I shit my pants.
The fact that you don't see the Blair Witch throughout the entire movie is probably the best move the directors could have pulled. They actually had somebody dressed up to be the witch, but they forgot to film that scene, so it just never made it into the movie. This is the most I've ever talked in a video ever. Coming in at number 6 is American Psycho, directed by Mary Harron, released in 2000. Young businessman Patrick Bateman commits a series of murders while struggling to fit in with his high-class society. Or does he? Patrick Bateman is possibly schizophrenic, and he imagined all of these kills inside of his head by himself. Mary Harron really wanted to leave the ending open-ended of like, do we think that Patrick Bateman actually killed all these people and he's actually insane? Or is he schizophrenic and he just thinks that he did because that's how he copes with his anger? Honestly, this is one of those movies that you kind of have to go watch for yourself because both sides of the argument can be argued. But that's what I love most about this movie, is that it is completely up to you at the end. Throughout the movie, you kind of see that Patrick has a skewed perspective on what's important in his life. Rather than focusing on relationships and building fellowship with other people, he's more focused on cars, suits, and little things like where we're going to dinner and what your business card looks like. This is a super narcissistic view on life, but Christian Bale does a fantastic job of just applying that very exquisitely to Patrick Bateman's character. This is very apparent in the business card scene, where all of the businessmen pull out their cards and compare very similar designs, but talk about how different they are. This is a very blatant sign showing that all of them are on the same page of his skewed perspective of life, but it also shows how obsessive Patrick is about fitting in. You can actually see Patrick getting visibly enraged when one of his peers prefers another business card over his.
Look at that subtle off-white coloring. The tasteful thickness of it. Oh my god. It even has a watermark.
Starting out my top 5 favorite scary movies is Halloween, directed by John Carpenter, released in 1978. High schooler Laurie Strode has a babysitting job on Halloween night. When some of her friends start to go missing, her past comes to haunt her. After the success of the horror movie Black Christmas, director John Carpenter found his inspiration for the film for his own Halloween. This is right before the birth of the slasher genre in the early 80s. Carpenter really played off this whole idea where you get very minimal shots of the killer the entire movie. You get POV shots that make the killer a little bit more mysterious and menacing, more than seeing the killer himself. Compared to the early 80s where slasher movies had more horror icons, which is what Michael Myers later became. But in the original Halloween, that was not the case. Even in some of the most iconic scenes in Halloween, Michael Myers is very low lit and or in the background as opposed to the foreground. I remember I would be like 8 years old and trick-or-treating, and I would think that like Michael Myers would be hiding behind a fence, or he would just be looking at me from a bush or some shit. Dude, that's terrifying. Even into my teens, dude, I was still afraid that Michael Myers was gonna like break into my house and kill me for some reason. I have a really weird irrational fear of a fictional character. I think it's because of that scene I saw really young whenever Michael stabbed that guy and he like stuck to the door. I think that's what fucking did it for me, dude. Number 4 is The Thing, directed by John Carpenter, released in 1982. A group of scientists in the Antarctic are victims of something otherworldly as it infiltrates their camp and picks them off one by one. Shrouded by its ability to shapeshift, who can you trust? We are exiting the 70s off of Carpenter's Halloween success and strolling into the 80s with this sci-fi horror film. This obviously wasn't a time of CGI, so literally everything in this movie was handmade by set designer Robin Botten, who also worked on movies like Fight Club and Basic Instinct. If you've seen this movie, you'll know how fucking badass that is. This dude thought of a head, a literal head, sprouting spider legs, dude.
That's impressive as hell.
Like, I made my grandpa an ashtray in 5th grade. Sure did. Number 3 is Jaws, directed by Steven Spielberg and released in 1975. The small island of Amity's summer is completely turned upside down when an unusually giant killer shark terrorizes the town. This movie brings a whole different type of fear to the table. Jaws isn't really like a horror movie, as one would say. Coming from somebody who has read the Peter Benchley novel multiple times, it's one of my favorite books. My second favorite book, actually. I really wouldn't even classify this as a horror movie if it weren't for Steven Spielberg's directing. Benchley's novel is more of a narrative of what's going on with Chief Brody's marriage and his wife cheating on him with Matt Hooper. The shark is more of a representation of his marital problems. As where Steven Spielberg took it, flipped it, and made it into a more horror movie, which, respect. To this day, I'm still afraid of oceans, and I would be lying to you if I told you that I wasn't afraid to get in a pool by myself. Easily my favorite scene in the entire movie is when Captain Quint is talking about his experience in the SS Indianapolis. Not only is it a really insightful historic monologue, but the way that the scene is lit and directed is very powerful. Robert Shaw is indistinguishable from his character Captain Quint as he goes into deep detail about the deaths of the sinking of the Indianapolis. The monologue is excellently executed. However, what really ties the scene together is the setting. Spielberg had them do this whole scene with Quint's monologue while they're on the boat at night after a long day of hunting for this big ass shark. The only source of light seems to be a light off camera and a swinging overhead light over the table. You can also see the ocean through the window in the background as Quint is speaking. It's truly a genius scene. Number 2 is probably something I'll get punched in the face for not making it number 1, but coming in at number 2 is The Shining, directed by Stanley Kubrick, released in 1980. Writer Jack Torrance takes his wife and son up to the Overlook Hotel to be the curator of the property for the winter. Cabin fever starts to set in as the family realizes that they are not alone in the hotel. Well, here we are with our 3rd Stephen King movie of the list. You should see a pattern by now that I love me some Stephen King. However, Stephen King actually hated this adaptation of his book. Kubrick made a lot of changes to King's novel to adapt it to a screenplay for cinematic purposes, including a different ending entirely. King has been very vocal about not liking this adaptation and liking the 1990s miniseries instead. Even though this is the adaptation that King prefers, audiences and critics widely love Stanley Kubrick's film. I'm gonna be honest with you guys, every time I've shown somebody this movie, they didn't really think it was that scary, but if you recall at the beginning of this movie, I said that my very first horror movie I ever saw when I was 6 years old and got me hooked, it was The Shining. Okay, call me fucked up, which you probably will, but my favorite scene from this movie is actually when Wendy finds Jack's book. And I say book very loosely because she doesn't find a book, she just finds multiple pages of the same sentence. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy.
Dude, what?
Jack scares Wendy by coming around the corner and just gets gradually more and more menacing throughout the scene, as Wendy, played by Shelley Duvall, grows more and more panicked at the same time. What really ties the scene together is Jack Nicholson's use of comedic timing throughout his lines. Stanley Kubrick is a very precise director, and the fact that he approved that Nicholson took the character in this direction for the scene is very impressive. Not only is Jack Torrance pretty much long gone mentally at this point in the movie, but you can hear the annoyance in his voice when he's speaking to Wendy even though he's lost his mind.
Not by the hair on your chinny chin chin. Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in.
Alright guys, so we have gone through 11 of 12 of my favorite scary movies, but I still had more I wanted to add to this list. I know, I need to relax. So without further ado, here are some honorable mentions. As Above, So Below, released in 2014. The Descent, released in 2005. Black Swan, released in 2010. Hereditary, released in 2018. Grave Encounters, released in 2012. And Us, released in 2019. Okay, so the number one entry on this list should not shock you if you recognize my shirt. Coming in at number 1 as my favorite scary movie of all time is Scream, directed by Wes Craven and released in 1996. Local Woodsboro resident Sydney Prescott and her friends are tormented and hunted by a serial killer around the 1-year anniversary of Sydney's mother's murder. I am 100% obsessed with everything Scream, Wes Craven, Ghostface, you fucking name it, dude. Wes Craven wanted to create a movie that was self-aware and satirical, and he really nailed it with Scream. By the time the mid-90s rolled around, the slasher genre was not popular anymore, and people were just getting very tired of the same horror movie stereotypes and storylines. From the beginning of the movie, Scream is very aware of itself. The killer himself asked Drew Barrymore, aka Casey Becker, what her favorite scary movie is, and right off the bat we're talking about John Carpenter's Halloween. The movie not only talks about other horror movies, but they also really play into talking about their own stereotypes, how to survive scary movies, and how movies are supposed to end. People hear the word satire and falsely think comedy, when in reality this movie takes a very meta / self-awareness approach, which is pretty much the first time this was ever done in cinema, or at least the first time it was popularized. I know, shocker, but my favorite scene of the entire movie is probably the whole last 20 minutes. I know that doesn't really narrow it down, but holy shit, the last 20 minutes are a fucking roller coaster. From the time Randy runs in the house and said he's gone mad, and then Billy says we all go a little mad sometimes, shooting Randy in the shoulder, to Billy accidentally hitting Stu in the head with the phone, the whole last scene is just horror genius. But if I had to pick out one specific part that was my absolute favorite and still gives me chills, is when Sydney asks them what their motive was. At first, Billy says that it was just because Sydney's mom was a whore and she liked to sleep around and that she deserved it. But then it slowly grows into something more personal. We find out that Sydney's mom was having sex with Billy's father, and that's what caused Billy's mom to leave his family. In this scene, you can also see that Stu wasn't aware of this specific motive, and no matter how many times I watch the movie, that part gets me every time. Well, there you go guys, that's a list of my top 12 favorite scary movies. I really tried to make a top 10, like, I really did. I got excited. Hopefully some of you share the same taste in movies as me and will continue to watch my HumpDay Horror series. If you don't like my taste in movies, I totally understand. I started out with Sleepaway Camp. If you know of a movie that I didn't talk about or you think that I would like, please suggest it down below. Even if you don't like my taste in horror movies, I love them so much and I love this community. Please give me all the suggestions you want. Are some of these movies in your top 12 or 10 favorites? Let me know in the comment section. Please put it down below. I would love to start a positive discussion in the comment section with you guys. I have more HumpDay Horror ideas that I want to do, but it really depends on what you guys want to see. So make sure you follow me on Instagram. This is it right here, wherever it's gonna be. I'm going to put polls on my stories so that you guys can vote which video you want to see next. So instead of this being every Wednesday, I'll probably do it 2 Wednesdays a month so that we have time to vote and I have time to shoot and rewatch whatever I need to rewatch. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like it and subscribe for new videos on Mondays and now on Wednesdays. And I will see you guys next time. Bye.